In this episode, we talk about the viability of the odd-even policy in Delhi. We also give you an update on the detailed results of Bihar's caste census. But first, we talk about Mizoram. Hi, I'm Rahel Philipose and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. Yesterday, the northeastern state Mizoram went to the polls for its 40 members assembly. Until 5 p.m., the state registered a 75.88% voter turnout. Now, these polls came against the backdrop of the crisis that has been going on in the neighboring Manipur since the 3rd of May, when ethnic clashes erupted between its two key communities, the dominant Meiteis and the Kuki tribes. These clashes and the ensuing violence had left an imprint on Mizoram, as the state's Mizo population shared an ethnicity with Manipur's Kuki-Zomi communities. And this had implications for the four parties that contested yesterday: the Mizo National Front, MNF, the Mizoram People's Movement, ZPM, the Congress and the BJP. To know more about these parties and the effect of Manipur's ethnic clashes on the Mizo elections, we speak to the Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah in this segment. So Sukrita, can you begin by telling us how the state has traditionally voted in the past?
So, Mizoram is a fairly new state. It was formally formed in 1987, and since then till date, it has been a duopoly where power has constantly swung between the Indian National Congress and the Mizo National Front. And it is the Mizo National Front which is in power currently. The current Chief Minister is Mizoram Thanga. And, you can understand the extent of the duopoly in place when you look at the chief ministers for the last 30 years. Since 1993, Mizoram has had only two chief ministers, which is Mizoram Thanga from the MNF and Lalthan Haula from the Congress. And it's been 10 years for Lalthan Haula, then 10 years for Mizoram Thanga, then another 10 years for Lalthan Haula, and then Mizoram Thanga's current term has happened. So this has largely been the pattern that has been in place. There have been smaller regional parties, but these entrenched parties have dominated by and large. Now Lalthan Haula has now retired. He's in his 80s now. He retired in 2021 from politics. And this year, of course, we have a new contender in place, which is the Mizoram People's Movement. Of course, we can discuss more later. The most significant outcome, I think, of the last election was that the Congress, right, which has been this behemoth in the state, it was relegated to third position in the assembly. So they had a really steep fall in the last elections in 2018.
And do we know why that was the case? Why did Congress suffer such a setback in 2018?
So, this has been a pattern of politics, right, where you could say by and large, who comes to power is dictated largely by anti-incumbency. So 2 terms, and then, there's a wave of anti-incumbency. And in fact, I think one of the patterns that has been in place is that when a government is voted out of power, even the chief ministerial candidate loses. So that's the kind of wave that happens every time. So in the previous election in 2013, the Congress had a whopping 34 MLAs in a 40-seater assembly. So that's massive. And in 2018, they came down to just 5 MLAs. And not only was that a significant decline for them, but they were also third in the assembly because there was an emergent new force, right, which is the Mizoram People's Movement. And the party was not even fully recognized then. So it was kind of a coming together of different regional forces. And there were independent candidates. So independent candidates backed by ZPM were voted in. They came in 8th. So of course, there was that kind of wave of anti-incumbency that dictates politics and governments in Mizoram. But there was also a new kind of emergent that was kind of eating into the Congress's space.
Right. So could you tell us more about this Mizoram People's Movement, the ZPM, and why they've managed to capture people's attention in the state?
So in this election, it is the ZPM which is being viewed as the primary challenger for the MNF. And it is led by Mr. Laldu Homa, who has he has a very long public history. He was an IPS officer. He was the chief of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's security. Then he joined the Congress later and he was an MP. And he's been in the public eye for a long time. And he's had smaller parties. But the Mizoram People's Movement, which kind of started started taking shape in 2017 is the coming together of different smaller regional parties and civil society organizations. Now, like I said, it has been these entrenched powers, right? Congress and MNF, which have been in power for so long. So what the ZPM is banking on, and what does seem to be working for it so far, is that, they are finally a new option, right? Where you've had a certain kind of governance in place for so long. And also keep in mind that, the development parameters in Mizoram are not great. So when you travel in the state, you realize this, and everybody talks about this, the state of road infrastructure. It does kind of become a representative or a symbol of the kind of lethargy or stasis that's in place. So for a lot of voters, for a lot of young people, the ZPM kind of represents this new kind of thing. And that's what they're presenting themselves as. So in fact, when I had asked one of their senior candidates, what is it? What is your primary poll plank, or what is it that you are banking on in this election? And he was very, technically it's just anti-incumbency, right? So he said that that's what we're hoping is going to work out for us. And they're also kind of implying that the MNF is no longer a true regional voice because it is technically an NDA partner, right? So even though it's not an alliance with the BJP in Mizoram, it's a little complicated. But in any case, so the ZPM is presenting itself as the only authentic regional voice, as something that can kind of bring Mizoram out of this long-standing system that has been in place and so on. And a lot of its candidates are youngsters, and they have roped in local celebrities like popular gospel singers, footballers, and so on. So it's kind of trying to have this fresh image and to break out of the system that's in place.
And what about the incumbent MNF? How different is their electoral plank from the ZPM?
So the ZPM is, of course, portraying itself as like a polar opposite, right? Because it is saying that, these are the grand old parties. The Congress and the MNF are these grand old parties, and we are a complete break from them. So the MNF, of course, like I said, has such a long history and presence in Mizoram. So it has its roots, or like deep roots in the state. What has changed in the last couple of years in Mizoram, of course, is that there has been a lot that's happened. Not necessarily to the Mizo people themselves, but to different ethnic groups who have a bond with them, right? So the Myanmar coup happened, and there were like more than 30,000 Chin refugees, and the Chins are of a common ethnicity as the Mizos. So they sought refuge in Mizoram, and they were welcomed with open arms by both civil society and the state government. And the state government has been defying the centre's directives in welcoming them. The centre said, do not harbour people as refugees. And then, of course, there's been the Manipur crisis, where the Kuki-Zomis, who are in conflict with the Meiteis in Manipur, are actually also of the same ethnicity as the Mizo. So there's a strong sense of, public support and very strong public sentiment about this crisis. And there have been a lot of Kuki-Zomi refugees also who have come to Mizoram, and they continue to be supported by the public. So the MNF, their approach seems to be, we helped all these people. We defied the center to support our ethnic brothers and sisters. So, the people are grateful to us. And they kind of hoping to mobilize this kind of strong public sentiment and kind of portraying themselves as a champion of Mizo nationalism. And though they of course talk about other development agenda, so on, to me it seemed very clear that this is what they're banking on, right? And being the X factor for them in this election.
Right. So, Sukrita, this Manipur issue, it also factored in the Congress and BJP's campaigns as well. So, now if we talk about these two national parties, can you first tell us, the Congress, how significant is Mizoram for them and the issues they have primarily focused on to regain their standing in the state?
So Congress has been this massive presence in Mizoram, and it suffered a terrible loss in 2018. And when it lost, it was, widely said, and the common phrase that was used that, this was Congress's last bastion in the Northeast. So it is significant for Congress in a way. And in many ways, Mizoram is such a deeply Christian state. It's 87% Christian, and so far, the BJP has not been able to penetrate the state in that way. So in that way, also for the Congress, this is a state for them to kind of try and make a comeback in. So now Congress has a new leadership because Lalthan Hawla has retired. So now we have Mr. Lal Sauta, who has a good track record as a former finance minister. So he's being seen as a kind of new leadership, even though he's in his late 70s. He's not exactly a fresh face, but a new leadership for the party. And it seems to me that they are very clear that what they are hoping will be a decisive factor for them is what is happening in Manipur, because they kind of hold that up as an example of the consequences of a BJP government in a sensitive northeastern state. And the leaders keep talking about how, I quote, they can destroy the social fabric of a state such as this. So they hold that up, and of course they attack the BJP, but like I said, the BJP is not really their challenger or not really a big player in the state. True that they challenge the MNF and the ZPM, because the MNF, like I said, is an NDA ally and the ZPM is a regional party. So in the Northeast, we have this common pattern of regional parties tying up with the BJP, and from there the BJP kind of grows within that state. So they've repeatedly been calling both these regional parties entry points for the BJP and the RSS. So they're kind of hoping that this fear or distrust or apprehensions about the BJP is going to help them. They are presenting themselves as the only bulwark against the BJP and the RSS. So that seems to be their primary plank. Again, though they have a lot of their manifestos have a lot of other policies and developmental policies, but this seems to be what they hope will be their X factor.
And what about the BJP? Could you tell us how they have navigated the Manipur issue in Mizoram, or what their approach was towards the Mizo elections?
So the BJP, I think, in my view, has been very measured in its... I think it's not being too ambitious, because in the last election, the BJP had contested in 39 out of 40 seats. It won only one, which was still a big win for them. It was the first seat that they had ever won in the Mizoram Legislative Assembly. But given that kind of track record, this time they're contesting in only 23 out of 40 seats. So they're not even giving a full contest. And during campaigning, what I noticed is that they're by and large focusing on areas which are dominated by minority communities. So in Mizoram, of course, the majority is the Christian Mizos, who are apprehensive about the BJP. And I think the BJP is realistic about what its chances are within that community. They are kind of focusing their energies on the Bru and Chakma minority communities and also the Mara communities. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi was supposed to come, and he didn't end up coming. It was cancelled. But he was not going to campaign in the bigger towns of Mizoram. He was going to campaign in a small town called Mamit. That has 3 constituencies which have a sizable Bru and Chakma minority population. So their approach is being strategic, and of course, given that they're only contesting in 23 seats, they don't also aim to form government. What leaders say is that they say because there's such a tight contest, it appears that there will be a tight contest between the ZPM and MNF and maybe to some extent the Congress. So they're saying that no one party will be able to form the government. So they're saying we hope to play the role of kingmaker. So that's where the BJP stands so far in Mizoram.
And next we talk about the odd-even policy in Delhi. Yesterday, the Delhi government reintroduced the odd-even scheme for private vehicles in the capital city. When we spoke to the Indian Express's Anonna Dutt, she explained the policy to us.
So the odd-even policy, which is basically a traffic rationing method where those private vehicles with odd numbers can ply one day and those with even numbers can do it the next. So this measure is right now a part of the GRAP plans, which kicks in automatically when the pollution levels go up in the capital.
Now, GRAP, the plan that Anonna mentions here, is the Graded Response Action Plan, which is a set of emergency measures that kick in to prevent further deterioration of air quality once it reaches a certain threshold in the Delhi NCR region.
So we have seen GRAP 1, GRAP 2, GRAP 3, different stages of measures that can be implemented depending on the pollution levels, and we've seen those going up over the last few days. And the odd even is supposed to kick in the day after Diwali, when I'm sure the government is also expecting that the pollution levels will further increase because of the use of firecrackers, etc.
Like Anonna mentioned, this plan will be implemented from the 13th of November till the 20th of November. And this is to control Delhi's air quality, which has dipped to the severe category. However, according to many experts that Anonna had spoken to, the odd-even policy does little for the health issues that come with such poor air quality. To know more about this, we speak to Anonna in this segment. So Anonna, could you first tell us what kind of short or long-term health issues one may face if they're exposed to this pollution that we're seeing in Delhi right now?
So the short-term consequences, I'm sure everybody's already facing, which is you will get congested noses, you will have dry cough, throat irritation, eye irritation. These are very common short-term symptoms which you would see in healthy individuals as well, because the pollution levels are extremely high now. But then you will also see symptoms, which is the long-term consequences. First, of course, it has a lot of impact on people who already have some sort of respiratory issue. For example, if they have asthma or COPD, then their symptoms are likely to worsen. This happens to patients every year. They need more medications, more nebulization to actually control their symptoms during this high pollution period. Other than that, it is also now there's a lot of evidence to show that long-term exposure over years and years, which, people in Delhi have with high level of pollution, high every winter season, long-term pollution is now linked to hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases like heart attacks, strokes. You also see that it leads to seasonal depression. It can increase the risk of cancer. It alters the person's immunity. So their ability to fight off infections is also worse off when the pollution levels are high. And people who do get infections, say you get a upper respiratory tract infection, sore throat, nose congestion, etc. During the pollution season, it would also be harder for it to heal. So you would have symptoms for a longer duration.
Right. And to control the pollution, the Delhi government will implement the odd-even policy. But when you spoke to experts, what did they say about the scheme? Is it a viable solution?
So no, the experts say that it will not reduce pollutants enough to have an impact on the health. And to be fair, it does reduce pollution levels. There are several studies which have shown that there is a decrease in PM levels when odd-even policy is implemented. But this result hasn't been very consistent. For example, you would see a decline in certain areas, but you wouldn't see a similar pattern in other parts of Delhi. So it will be in pockets. Then you would see it during a certain hours of the day. So a lot of the researchers found that the early morning hours were still as polluted, but it gradually went down during the day. So even implementing the odd-even policy, which does result in fewer cars plying, I think in 2016, there was a 35% drop, even with all the exceptions of CNG cars, etc. There was still 35% drop in traffic according to studies. And this results in lower emissions, but lower emissions doesn't always translate into lower concentration of pollutants in the air. This is because it's also influenced by, say, the wind speed, the temperature of the day. So a lot of the meteorological factors determine how much pollution stays in the air close to the ground. So, even with odd-even policy in place, it might not drastically reduce. And the reductions that the studies found was to the tune of, say, 5% or 10%. So 10% of 500 PM 2.5 is also like 450, right? And 450 is still way too high and can cause negative consequences for the health.
Right. And Anonna, the policy helps in cutting down vehicular emissions. So does that give a respite to these health impacts?
So basically, when there are fewer vehicles plying, not only is there a reduction in, say, PM 2.5, which is the most common pollutant we talk about, which is the small particulate matter, but there'll be also reduction in gases emitted from the vehicles. And nitrogen dioxide is a very common, it's sort of like a marker for traffic pollution, because whenever there's a fossil fuel burn, it emits nitrogen dioxide. Now, of course, odd even will result in little drop in PM 2.5, but drastic drop in NO2. That's not the case. So the researchers estimate that it would be a proportional drop. But why that is still important is because there's an AIM study right now which tracked the emergency room visits days after pollution levels went up in the city. And it shows that, nitrogen dioxide led to a higher increase, some over 50% increase in emergency room visits as compared to 19% increase with PM 2.5 increase. So even though the drop in nitrogen dioxide might still be less at par with PM 2.5, it's likely to help in reducing these emergency room visits. Although that's just what experts say, this is not supported by, say, a study.
And so what do experts say about the long-term solutions that Delhi needs to curb the health issues?
So if you remember when diesel vehicles were phased out with CNG in Delhi, there was a drastic drop in pollution levels for a few years, but then those gains were again lost. Now experts believe again when we switch over from say BS4 vehicles to BS6, which are more efficient and do not emit as much pollutants as the BS4 vehicles, or when we switch over to electric vehicles, which the government has been pushing for. So when there are these changes happening, these are things that are happening right now. It's not a sudden change, but experts believe that in say 10 years or so, we will feel the impact of these changes. But yeah, more so for the time being, what they say, there's a need to, yes, reduce vehicles on road, which would need better public transport. Then, when we're talking about any of these restrictions, these short-term restrictions, say, and not even, what they say is it has to be a regional effort. It cannot be that Delhi is implementing these measures, because it's not that the air from neighboring states is not entering Delhi. So we have to implement it in a larger Indo-Gangetic region, because that's where we have the severe problem of pollution. Of course, we have to address parali burning, because that also is a significant proportion of pollutant. When it comes to parali burning, of course, we don't have so much problem, say, if coming from Bihar or UP, where so the air doesn't blow from that side towards Delhi. It's usually the pollutants that are generated in, say, Punjab, Haryana that enters Delhi. So again, the thing is we have to look at the whole region. And in the meantime, doctors say don't burst crackers. That's just a very good advice, because that will increase the already bad air pollution. And some of the doctors have also been suggesting the use of air purifiers, especially for, say, very young children or the very elderly with comorbid conditions who are likely to face the brunt of air pollution.
And in the end, we talk about Bihar. Yesterday, Bihar tabled the detailed results of its caste survey in the State Assembly. Now, as per the detailed results, more than a third of families inhabiting Bihar were living in poverty, making do with a monthly income of Rs 6,000 or less. The report also acknowledged considerable poverty among the upper castes, though the percentage was, predictably, much higher among backward classes, Dalits and tribals. As per the report tabled by the Parliamentary Affairs Minister Vijay Kumar Chowdhury, the state was home to about 2.97 crore families, out of which more than 34.13% were poor. The report also stated that over 50 lakh Biharis are living outside the state in search of livelihood or education opportunities. Now, this comes a month after the Bihar government released the preliminary findings of the survey, which revealed that the extremely backward classes, or EBCs, constitute the largest social group in the state, followed by the other backward classes, or OBCs. Together, they make up 63% of the state's population, while only 15% of the population falls into the unreserved general category. Now, after the result was tabled yesterday, Bihar Chief Minister Nitish Kumar told the Assembly that he wants to increase reservation for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, as well as other backward classes and extremely backward classes. The reservation is meant for government jobs and educational institutions. He said that reservations for OBCs needed to be raised from 50 to 65%, while for SCs and STs, which together account for a 17% quota, it should be raised to 22%. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. It was hosted by me, Rahel Philipose, and written and produced by Utsa Sarmin. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.